Welcome back to Muley Nation. Here we take being a student of the game very seriously. We're here to give you guys the ultimate resources in mule deer education. Always seek learning. We encourage to ask questions. Today we've got a great question. Someone that's just been hunting for 3 years, not too long, new to deer hunting. They didn't grow up doing it. They said, I'm seeing a lot of deer, a lot of small bucks, but haven't been able to find those next level 4+ year old bucks. Any advice for someone fairly new and still learning? This can give you a loaded question. There's a lot that goes on. Obviously, finding big bucks, you can't just say do one thing and you're going to find it. It's hunting. There's a lot of variables. But I've broken it down into different things that we're going to talk about today. The first one is the 3 things deer need to survive, being able to break down the terrain and understand the landscape, and then also what features to look for within that landscape. The first thing that comes to my mind, though, when I read this question is, where are you seeing the bucks, all the deer that you're seeing? Pay attention to what's around them, the feed, their water. And the reason why I think that too is, are they close to human pressure? Are they close to roads? Are they close to trails? Are they small because it gets a lot of pressure? Because big bucks don't hide in certain places. They don't get big in hidey holes just because it's good enough for them to live. They get big there because it's safe, it's hard to hunt. There's not going to be a lot of people there. So that leads into the 3 things deer need to survive, which is food, security, and water. Those small bucks, they probably have all of that, but what's missing in that terrain that makes a big buck not want to be there? Jumping right into the first category, or the 3 things that deer need to survive, the first one on that list is food. Now, deer don't just eat anything. They're browsers, not grazers. Elk will go around and they'll just mow down the place. I mean, yeah, they can choose what they like best, but that's what grazing is. Elk, cattle, big animals, they just eat anything in their path. Mule deer, on the other hand, they're browsers, so they're picky. They want the most nutritious foods, and those foods can change depending on the season, the location, where they're at. I'm not going to go into that today. There are certain foods that deer like in certain seasons, so you just have to kind of figure out, do some studying, which ones is he eating, and you'll get a grasp of what the layout looks like, what the plants look like, to know whether that is big buck country or not. That's number 1 on the list. Number 2 on the list, but I would say as equally as important as food, is security. If a buck doesn't feel safe, the buck is not going to be there. If a buck can't hide from you, he's not going to be there. He has to have a place there or nearby that he can run to get away from predators. They're always being hunted. Humans are not the only thing hunting them. They are smart. They know where to go. They know what terrain features give them the most protection. They know the easiest route to get there. So their security can be a clump of trees to where they're hidden, embedded for the daytime. It can be cliffy areas where it's hard for predators to get there. It can even be an escape route up and over a ridge, out of sight, and then finding a place of security on that other side. Typically, they don't like to do that unless bumped really hard. More of these features of security can be trees, like I had mentioned, clumps of trees, thick timber. That's where they like to go to in the transition time in October when it's hard to find them. They're usually in that thick timber. They will take cliffs, big rocks. They'll even find areas that is just hard to see, but it doesn't have to be super thick. So if you're in a burned area and there's lots of deadfall, Might not be a bunch of thick timber, but they can lay down and you won't be able to see them. So as long as a deer feels safe in where he's living, that's a great indication of him staying there for a long time until there's a hunter coming in to push him out or weather is pushing him down to lower elevation. The third one on the list is water, and I put this one last on the list because in my head, it's not as important. I don't focus on water for mule deer. Yes, they need water. Every living animal needs water to survive and to live. But deer can get their water from the plants they eat, from the food, especially when it rains. They can get the water off of aspen leaves, just the leaves and the flowers that they eat in general. They're not as big as elk. They don't need to go water every day. I've seen deer go to water anywhere from 3 days to 7 days, and when I mean go to water, I mean an actual water source. So that is why I put that at the bottom of the list. It is still important. There should be water within a mile or two. It is also very helpful that water might be in the bottom of the drainage that they're in, because then they don't have to go as far and they have a shorter living area. Deer like to live in rough country, but if they can have everything all together, it makes life easier. There is an exception to this water thing. That's if you're hunting in dry desert areas, but today we're talking about mountainous climates, subalpine, alpine, heavily forest places, just those big mountainous areas where there's usually plenty of water, usually plenty of rain. They can get the water from their plant sources. Now, if you can find where these three things are present, ultimately, that's buck country. But that doesn't mean because you have found these things that there will be a deer there. Deer are obviously where deer are. Sometimes you might run into a place where it looks perfect. The mountainside looks lush and green. You can tell that there is the feed that they like to eat on. There's ribbon cliffs that they like to bed under. There might be some patches of timber below to go for security, and you can visibly see a wash that they can escape from as a predator comes. There still might not be a deer there because they like to concentrate in certain areas. You just have to be on your feet, move, look for these different places, and you'll find the bucks eventually. One of my favorite types of terrain is the subalpine. Everywhere is great. When you can find a big buck, that's awesome. But my favorite is the subalpine, just right below timberline. It's still really open, conducive to spot and stalk, but they have that extra cover. It's usually pine trees, crumbles, pockets, places where deer will feel safer because the security is a little closer. Yes, I know that they can find their security and be hidden in the alpine high country, but down there in that subalpine, they're closer to cover. There's still plenty of feed, and the bucks there, what I have noticed, live there for a lot longer period of time throughout the year. They're in there for the summer months when they're in the velvet. I still consider that high country velvet bucks. But even once the velvet comes off, depending on how much pressure there is and the weather during the year, they will still be in that subalpine area. They still like those thicker pockets of pine trees, but they want to be on the edge of those to come out and feed in the open, because in October, there can still be a lot of feed up there. Now, again, once hunting pressure comes in there, they will start going lower. Later in October, they tend to find the thicker timber, hide from people, and they're just starting their pre-rut phase as the weather is pushing them down and they're getting ready for that rut. So those are the first things you need to look for: the food, the security, the water. The next thing you need to know to find big bucks is understanding the terrain and understanding how to break down that landscape and the features inside that landscape. Primarily what we're going to focus on today are the types of ridges, where you can find them. So you've got your primary ridges, and if we're talking about up in the high country, the high mountains, you have one big ridge that comes down and it kind of creates that divide. That's your primary ridge. Off of this main ridge, you'll have secondary ridges that shoot off. They're also pretty big, but they will go from the top of the primary ridge down into the main drainage. With all of those lined up, creating little mini drainages that run down into that main drainage. Off of those secondary ridges will be finger ridges. Typically these are small because those ridges are closer together. They just run down into that little mini drainage. And all of these ridges are important to know because it can help with knowing where the deer go in the different seasons. The primary ridges, usually your high elevation, the high alpine. A lot of the times you'll see those as the big rocky peaks. Up in the big rocks, there's not going to be a whole lot of deer, but you can still find the deer down on those primary ridges as it gets a little lower. But these are typically your high country, high elevation stuff. The secondary ridges will begin at that high elevation, but then continue to move down with timber starting to grow on it. Finger ridges are typically small. They're really rugged and steep. I find those to be really great bedding areas because these finger ridges, in my experience, I have seen them to be able to the bucks bed up underneath these ridges or right up against the base of them or even on them. They're so steep that they kind of have a wall on their backs and they'll be able to see out in front of them. I think it's important to be aware of these different types of ridge types because typically this is where deer is going to spend most of its time, except for winter, maybe in the rut time where it gets lower. But in the early season, through mid-season, all through October, you can find them from the tops of the peaks up high, where that will depend on wherever you're at, what state you're in, what mountain range you're on, all the way down to 8,000 feet. You'll find deer through August, from August through October. Now moving into the features and places to look for within the landscape, the first one is alpine basins. Now that's normally your summertime bucks, right? They're in the velvet, they're still in their summer pattern, hunting pressure has not hit them yet. Once hunters start to go up in there and they start feeling the pressure from them and their velvet comes off, they will come back down into those secondary ridges to find thicker cover. And that brings us to looking at those secondary ridges. And again, this is one of my favorite places because that holds that subalpine terrain that we talked about earlier, with sparse trees, still plenty of openings, lush green feed. They're there most of the hunting season, except for the late season getting down into the rut. Next one to look for are ribbon cliffs. Usually you'll find these on those secondary ridges. Just to look for a cliff that runs horizontal, parallel with that ridge. It's a great place for deer to bed up under, or it's good to look at because it kind of makes a travel path for them because they're not going to climb the cliffs. They have to walk around to get below or above them. So make sure you're watching those as travel routes. And if you get a buck pattern under those, you can even make an ambush spot for those bucks. The next one are benches. Now I've also seen bucks like to bed on benches because sometimes benches are actually created under those ribbon cliffs. So benches are great places for deer because they do live on such steep stuff. They like to have a break every once in a while. They'll find a lot of feed, a lot of bedding, and security on those benches. I remember just this year actually when it was about 10,500 feet, high country, in burn area down low, and it thinned out as you kept going higher. But I remember up top, up on the primary ridge, it almost made just like a little bowl. And it wasn't that tall, it was maybe 200 to 300 feet tall. And right below it with the micro terrain and everything, It made a dip, a bench with some small pockets of pine trees lined at the base of that top ridge. I found that to be amazing for bedding and feeding. They will come down a little bit into more open in the nighttime, see them spotted in the morning, but when they're spooked or just wanting to go up to bed, they will jump up into there, and they love those places where there's something steep behind them, but flat and easy for them to bed into, get up underneath a pine tree. Those secondary ridges, ribbon cliffs, benches, those are great for mule deer. Again, that's one of my favorite places to look. And getting into the next ones, we're going to talk about avalanche chutes and rock slides. Now, typically these are also up in a little higher elevation, more rugged terrain. It's steeper where the rocks will actually roll down and slide. These are good because all that abuse from the rocks will destroy the growth, but then promote new growth coming in. So that is a great place for the deer to feed, but also is generally next to a lot of cover too. So if you watch in between the rock slide and the cover, you can look at those openings all times of the day and you'll see bucks creeping out to feed. Same goes with avalanche chutes. The abuse from all the snow will sometimes kill that vegetation. New growth will come in, but plus there's all that water to keep it growing, keep it green for a lot longer. This next one is really important that I always look for. I always make sure I use maps. onX tells you right where the roads and trails are. I like to look for drainages where there are no roads and trails, typically meaning that you have to walk a little further, because big bucks don't like to hide somewhere where it's easy for people to see them. They like to be places where it's hard to hunt, it's not easily accessible, and they can hide there without being seen. If you can look at a pocket and it's a very popular vantage point off of a road, yes, sometimes you can get lucky and see a nice buck in there, but usually you're not going to find much but a couple 2 points in a doe. So get off the roads a little bit, try and go up and over and look into a drainage where there are no roads, no trails. That typically means less pressure. The bucks feel more safe. This next one should be an obvious one to a lot of people, but if not, pay attention. Besides the subalpine, I love looking in burn areas. And yes, the subalpine, it can get burned, but typically in the subalpine area, on that tree line, it's not so forested. There's more pockets of trees. For some reason, at least the place that I've hunted, I don't see as much of burn there. But if you get down to where there's more forested areas and then burn areas in there, it clears things right up. And remember, you can look through all that burn, especially if you have good glass. Just let your glass do the walking. You don't spend your time unless you have good reason to go in there, but don't spend your time walking, trying to still hunt, stepping over all that deadfall. Yes, if that's your last tactic, go for it. But sit back, glass through that deadfall, and you'll be surprised what you find in there. It might be open terrain, and you might think their velvet is off, so they're going to be hidden in cover. There's so many places that the deer can be in there and blend in without you seeing them. I think to myself all the time, I'm looking at areas with a bunch of deadfall, a bunch of new growth, which is another benefit of burn areas. They can bed down, and if you don't watch them bed down, you won't see them until they're up. Sometimes you don't even see them because they'll just be walking around and you'll just see a flicker of antlers as it moves, and that's the only thing that cues you in. But if they didn't move, you're not seeing them. So my point is, even though it's open, they'll be in there. They love that because of the new growth, the feed. They can blend in very well, and they know that. So they will stay in those burned areas. Another thing that I have noticed with burn is I see a lot of bucks right at the edge of the thick timber that hasn't been burned and the burn area right here. They like to be close to that because then they do have the security if needed to go into something thick to where they know that they can't be seen or bothered. Also, sometimes you'll find that the fire will burn in weird patterns in trees. So sometimes there's pockets of live trees within the burn. They like that stuff too, that I've noticed. As we wrap up here, I want to give you guys a couple little bonus tips to be aware of. Something that's great to do to up your odds in finding bucks. Make sure you're at your glassing point before it gets daylight. Now this is a common one. You hear this all the time, but you hear it for good reason if you're not doing it. I think it's a big thing that you should start doing. I know that means you have to hike in the dark. I hate hiking in the dark, but do it. You'll find a lot more. You'll be sitting down in the dark. Deer won't be able to see you as easily. Get all set up and start glassing. Even if you can't see with the naked eye, you'll be able to see through your binoculars and spotting scope before your eyes can see. So be there before light. Also, stay there or wherever you're glassing. You don't have to stay in one spot all day, but wherever you're glassing in the evening, stay there until it's dark. And again, I know that sucks and you got a long hike back to camp, but those big bucks will come out 5 minutes, maybe right at dark. This last tip is kind of a two-parter. The first part to that is just to cover country. When I go into a new area, I want to get his eyes on as many bucks as possible, and I want to be able to learn and see the country. That means I can't sit in one place. The only time that I'll sit in one place for a long time is if I'm on a really big vantage point. I can see miles all around me. But if I'm scouting or hunting when the bucks are still in the velvet, typically they'll be out there in the open in the morning time. So if it comes first light, I'm glassing and I'll take the time to pick apart the hillside because sometimes they're harder to see, but as the daylight comes, they're obviously easier to see. The red coats stand out. If I'm seeing a lot of animals, I'm seeing a lot of bucks, sure, I'll sit there and watch. But if I'm only seeing a couple bucks over here, some does down low, another buck over here, I'm just going to pack up, move to a different spot after 20, 30 minutes. Because typically, like I said, the deer will ought to be out in the open. They go into the cover to get away from the heat. If they're not out in the open in the morning time, go and trying to find bucks before they do go into cover. Sometimes I'll even do that if there is a big buck in there. I'll watch him for a little bit. I like to study them, see what they do. If I really want to know him and I know he's the one, I'll watch him all day long to see his habits. But it's always good to have those plan Bs to find as many bucks as possible. So even if I do find a big buck, I will move places to find another big buck. Going along with moving, covering country, goes with how you move in deer country. Make sure you approach new drainages, new deer country with caution and in silence, with the mindset of there could be a monster buck just right over this hillside. I've made this mistake countless of times, and it's an easy mistake to make. We get walking, we get lazy, therefore our mentality gets lazy, and we just want to get to where we're going. Earlier just this year, I was sick and tired of hiking. I got poured on. I was in the open country. There was no cover for me, and I just wanted to get to where I was going. But I popped over a ridge, and I just stood there. I was skylined. That's another big no-no for finding deer. And I'm sitting there, and I turn, and I look, and it's right after a rainstorm, so deer are up and about. The storm broke. The deer want to get up and feed while it's cooled down. And about 300 yards away, I just see the gray body. You know, it's August time. When you see a buck that's gray, with my experience, typically that means it's kind of that next level deer. And I saw his gray body. I could see his velvet antlers sticking out past his ears, really tall. I didn't even need binos. I immediately turned and I knew I screwed up. Like, I should not have been standing there on the skyline. I shouldn't have been so casual about it. I was thinking, well, we walked through the same country for the last 2 miles. This thing looks exactly the same. I'm not going to see anything. Well, sure. I stood right there up at skyline. He was staring right at me, and there he goes. a mistake that is made by everybody. I'll probably make it again, but I'll do my best not to. There you have it. This information is a must if you want to find those next level deer. I hope this helped. If you want to go deeper into everything about scouting high country mule deer, download my free guide. It goes through all of the details. It breaks down everything that we talked about. So go ahead, download that. Tell me what you think about it. And like always, be a student of the game, and good luck on the hunts this year.